So JD Vance just said something on X that has ignited what can only be described as a firestorm. Like, it is ridiculous how many people have been talking about this, and actually that's what you're kind of watching right here is more talking about this. But basically his comments, he was talking about ordered love and how we owe specific responsibilities to those closest to us. But this, as I say, it's ignited a firestorm of comments. A lot of Christians are fighting back on this, saying that this doesn't actually represent Christian values, which is something that he claims in this video. You know what? Let's just go ahead and get to the video now. Let's watch what he has to say, then we'll start to break this down. And I think by the end of this video, you're going to see why his comments not only make sense, but are also biblical. But you got to stick around to see why that's the case. Let's go ahead and watch this clip.
But there's this old school, and I think it's a very Christian concept, by the way, that you love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country. And then after that, you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world. A lot of the far left has completely inverted that. They seem to hate the citizens of their own country and care more about people outside their own borders. That is no way to run a society. And I think the profound difference that Donald Trump brings to the leadership of this country is the simple concept, America first. It doesn't mean you hate anybody else. It means that you have leadership, and President Trump has been very clear about this, that puts the interests of American citizens first. In the same way that the British Prime Minister should care about Brits and the French should care about the French, we have an American president who cares primarily about Americans, and that's a very welcome change.
Naturally, as I say, this triggered an absolute firestorm. Like, X is just ablaze with comments, people on both sides of this. Some have been praising JD Vance for saying what should be obvious, what's also they think in their minds very biblical. And then others like Father James Martin and Dr. Laura Robinson and a lot of others have been claiming that he's pushing a false version of Christianity. So how do we know who's actually right about this? Let's first look at some of the critics. Let's look at Father James Martin, see what he has to say about this. He says, actually, no, this misses the point of Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan. After Jesus tells a lawyer that you should love your neighbor as yourself, the lawyer asks him, and who is my neighbor? In response, Jesus tells the story of a Jewish man who has been beaten by robbers and is lying by the side of the road. The man is helped not by those closest to him, a priest and a Levite, but rather by a Samaritan. At the time, Jews and Samaritans would have considered one another enemies. Okay, so he's helping someone who is an enemy of this person is actually the one helping them. So Jesus' fundamental message is that everyone is your neighbor and that it is not about helping just your family or those closest to you. Okay, so this is his critique here, is that actually everyone is your neighbor and there is no hierarchy. There is no hierarchy. There it is. There is no hierarchy of our duties toward other. We should love everyone the same. Let's now look at what Dr. Laura Robinson said. She says, this is not a Christian concept. Vance is just making stuff up, and he knows his audience is so ignorant about Christianity that they'll believe him. You are among that number. She's talking about the person, Jack Poso, who originally posted this clip. Yeah, so that's what his critics are saying. So after the backlash, this is where things start to get a little bit spicy. So JD Vance says, just Google Ordo Amoris, which is a Latin phrase. Aside from that, the idea that there isn't a hierarchy of obligations violates basic common sense. Does Rory, one of his detractors, we haven't talked about him yet, really think his moral duties to his own children are the same as his duties to a stranger who lives thousands of miles away? Does anyone? So he's talking about this is a very commonsensical moral principle, but he also, we're gonna talk about the Christian side of things from the Bible and also from church history. But JD Vance, part of his spicy response here says, I've said this before and I'll say it again. The problem with Rory and people like him is that he has an IQ of 110 and thinks he has an IQ of 130. This false arrogance drives so much elite failure over the last 40 years. That's a really spicy take. I can't necessarily say that I disagree with it, though. I think there's a lot of people who think that they're smarter than they actually are. And so they'll go out and they'll think that they can critique someone without really knowing all the facts. But so I did actually Google. That's what he says. He says, just Google Ordo Amoris, right? So what does this phrase actually mean? It means order of love. It comes from St. Augustine's De Citivitae Dei. And I'm absolutely sure that I'm mispronouncing that. It's translated the city of God. All right. And there he argues that love must be rightly ordered to achieve justice and virtue. Augustine basically warns that disordered love, placing lesser loves above the greater ones, leads to moral collapse. Okay. This is what he argues. All right, I just looked it up. It's pronounced de civitate. That's probably still wrong. De civitate Dei. Again, the city of God is how you translate that. But this idea has basically shaped Christian moral thought for over a millennium. So J.D. Vance is not just, he's not making this up. I think that's at least what this shows, is that he didn't just come up with this idea out of nowhere. He's echoing one of the most fundamental Christian teachings, at least from church history. Now, let's turn back to the Bible. Right? Let's talk about the Good Samaritan story, because the claim from Father James Martin and others, a lot of people are pointing to this parable as like conflicting with J.D. Vance's point here. So let's actually just read it. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." Okay, I want you to notice there is a little bit of hierarchy in that one. We're going to take a closer look at that in just a second. Let's continue. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" That's what this whole conversation is about. Who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, "A man was going to," and this is where the parable comes in. "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, an enemy, as he journeyed," that's actually not in there, I just added that, "but a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave him to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back.' Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" He said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." Our question is, does this parable contradict a hierarchy of love? The short answer is no. The Samaritan did not abandon his family or neglect any of his obligations. He simply responded to an immediate moral need. Right? This was immediate. This was right in front of him. This was someone, you might say, a neighbor that was right in front of him. That's what he responded to. And so Jesus was not rejecting ordered love. He was actually condemning hypocrisy. Those who claim to be righteous, but ignore acts of mercy that are literally right in front of them. In fact, in my view, the very structure of this passage reinforces ordered love. Before telling the parable, Jesus states that the 2 greatest commandments, we talked about this a little bit, love God first, then love your neighbor. The hierarchy already is in place right here in this very passage that people are pointing to. This passage, this parable, also highlights that proximity plays a really important role in moral obligation. The priest and the Levite were the ones physically closest to the injured man, yet they failed to act. But the Samaritan encountered the man on his path and fulfilled his immediate moral duty. But it gets way more interesting than that. Let's go ahead and turn now to the Blue Letter Bible. The Blue Letter Bible. And this is what we're going to be focusing on, is in Luke 10:29, the lawyer asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" All right, we're going to focus on what is that word? Who is my neighbor? Because a lot of people are saying that everyone, this passage shows that everyone is my neighbor. So actually what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Greek. The way that you pronounce this Greek word that is translated neighbor is plesion. Plesion. All right. Plesion. All right, so this I think is actually very key to understanding like what this passage is actually about. So according to blueletterbible.org, there's a couple different usages for this term. So any neighbor could be 1, a friend. Number 2, any other person. And where 2 are concerned, the other, according to the Jews, is any member of the Hebrew nation and commonwealth. Okay, so it's not just anyone. A neighbor is someone who is part of the Jews, part of the Hebrew nation, part of the commonwealth. All right. And then 3rd, according to Christ, any other man, irrespective of nation or religion, but here's the important part, with whom we live or whom we chance to meet. It's not just anybody. That's not what a neighbor is. A neighbor is not literally everyone. A neighbor is someone irrespective of nation or religion with whom we live or whom we chance to meet. So in this passage, in this parable, plesion does not refer to obligations toward distant people we've never met, but actually to those that we encounter in our daily lives. And that's the point of the whole parable, right? He comes across this person and they don't help him. They don't extend mercy to this person that's right in front of them. You have to be a moral monster in order to do that. And that's what Jesus is pointing out. Like, you claim to be a religious person, yet there's someone in your immediate vicinity and you do nothing. Moreover, the Good Samaritan story is completely unrelated to discussions over mass immigration policy in America. My duties to a single person hurting that might be like right in front of me, right within my proximity, is different than my duties to, say, like 1 million people across the world that need help. This parable does not suggest that nations have the same obligations to all people, regardless of citizenship or proximity. If J.D. Vance is right here, we should expect to find this principle throughout the Bible, not just in this one passage, right? His principle of ordered love. And guess what? That is exactly what we see. So let's look at some passages really quickly. All right, in Mark 12:30-31, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your mind and with all your strength. And the second, we're talking about the commandments here. The second commandment is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. All right, so there's a hierarchy. This passage, like, it explicitly ranks love for God above love for neighbor. And this is what Christians have known forever, except maybe until recently, until someone started to point out that there's an order of our love, and then, everyone just starts losing their minds once you point something out. All right, let's look at a few more passages. This one is in 1 Timothy 5:4. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. Let us first learn to show godliness to their own household. And then verse 8 here, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Interesting hierarchy you got going on here, Bible. All right, let's turn now to another passage in Galatians 6, verse 10. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. So we should prioritize fellow believers. According to the Bible, right? And so, but we may not like the Bible, and we may just want to have our own concept of what love looks like, which actually might be considered non-Christian as opposed to what some people are claiming. So let's be clear about this. JD was not making things up. He was not just saying things that were unchristian or non-biblical. They were both biblical and very obvious. The fact that this is even controversial shows just how modern thinking has drifted from reality. Well, there you have it. Let me know what you think about this video in the comments. As always, Christianity is true.